Okay, so absolute value is this topic today. So absolute value is defined as the magnitude of a real number without regard to its sign. So I don't care if it's a positive number or a negative number, I'm worried about the magnitude of the number. So when I think of absolute value, I think about distance. Because if I drive 5 kilometers north to Rosenfeld or 5 kilometers south to Gretna, I don't care about the directional part of it, I'm just caring about the distance of 5. Okay, so distance can never be expressed with a negative. You can't do a negative distance, right? So the absolute value is treated like brackets, and the brackets are just straight lines instead of curvy brackets. Okay, so the absolute value of 3 has a magnitude of 3. The absolute value of negative 3 has a magnitude of 3. Okay, since absolute is treated like brackets, I'm going to do inside the brackets first. So 2 subtract 7 is negative 5. And then the brackets, so now what's the absolute value of negative 5? 5. So inside the bracket, 10 subtract 2 is 8. What's the absolute value of 8? Just 8. Okay, so this one's a little bit trickier. So I'm going to do this part last because that's on the outside of the bracket. So first of all, if I cover that up, what is the absolute value of negative 15? 15. Then this means basically to times it by a negative 1 afterwards because it's outside the bracket. Does that make sense? So then that would be a final answer of negative 15. Okay, let's just talk about order here for a second. So what's the difference in these math equations? This one says to do the numbers first inside the brackets and then do the absolute. So that's the one where we did 2 subtract 7 is negative 5, then absolute. So subtract and then absolute. So what's the difference if I write something like this? It would mean what's the absolute value of 2 and then subtract 7. So this would be the absolute of 2 and then I'm subtracting 7 because it's out of the bracket. So this one would be a negative 5 and then this one ended up being a positive 5, right? Do you see the difference in how I'm saying that? This is the absolute value of 2 minus 7 and this is the absolute value of 2 then minus 7. Okay, so it's treated mathematically like a bracket. Okay, solving absolute equations. So what could I have taken here? The absolute value of what? I could have done a 4 or I could have done a negative 4. So inside the bracket, I could have put a 4 in there or a negative 4 in there. Okay, so here, so the bracket is 2x. So what could I put inside the bracket?
5 or negative 5.
The bracket, the whole thing. I could either put a 10 or a negative 10. Therefore, x could be a 5 or x could be a negative 5. Because I'm saying like this, what could I put in there to be 10? That's what I'm trying to think about. I could have had a negative 10 in there or a positive 10. So what could I put inside the bracket to give me that 5? I could be either doing a 5 or a negative 5. So this x minus 2 could have been a 5, or the x minus 2 could have made a negative 5. Okay, so think about inside the brackets could be 5, or the inside of the bracket could be negative 5. Okay, solving both, this would be a 7. And be careful here, what do you think that would be? Negative 3. Okay, I often get people who solve 7 and then they just make the other one negative 7. That doesn't work. Okay, it obviously did with here because it was just multiplying, but this is adding, so it's not. Okay, can you try this one on your own? See if you can do this one. It's the same as the last. So I started with the inside could have been an 11, or that inside could have been a negative 11. Okay, and the rest is just algebra, so I got 6 or negative 16. Okay, this one is a little bit different. What should I do differently at the start? I need to move that first. Okay, so I need to move that first, so that one is different. And now I do the split. So that inside stuff, it could either equal 8 or negative 8 now. Okay, so this one is just algebraically move to get the absolute alone. And then you can leave as a fraction when you get to that second one will just end up being something fractional. Just leave it like that. Okay, you can always go back and check your answer too, right? Okay, next one. Are we ready? That was good, the algebra. So here again, you should be moving that because it's not in the bracket. So that needs to go away first. And then we're going to pause and we're going to think about this before we write anything further. What's happening here? What do we know about absolutes? That will they ever turn out negative? No. So then I can write no solution. Okay, absolutes will never turn out negative because the absolute value of 2 is positive 2 and the absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2. It always turns out positive. Okay, and the last one. So here I should move that value. So I'm going to add 20. So that would be 18. Okay, and then I can now do the split. Okay, so that inside of the bracket part could equal an 18, or it could have equaled negative 18. Right? Do we understand? These are the situations. Okay, so finish out your algebra here. Leave as a fraction is great. Okay, so I got 2 fraction answers on that one, and that's good. Okay, I'm going to jump to kind of near the end here. Let me see where it is. Okay, skip a few pages, and this is called graphing absolute values. So it's kind of near the end. Okay, let's talk about some rules with absolute values. Okay, so what happens to us when we absolute value a positive number? What happened to it? It didn't do anything. It just stayed, right? So the absolute of 5 was just 5. What about the number 0? What happens to us if we would absolute value 0? What do you think? It just stay. What would happen to us if we absoluted a negative? So the absolute value of negative 5 would become positive. So it would change. So that's the idea. So that's what we're going to do on the graphs. Okay, so where is this graph? Positive or 0, it's going to stay. So I need to show an overlap. So that part of this graph would stay because it was positive and 0. And so would this chunk of the graph. So those 2 pieces of the graph will stay put. So I'm going to overlap it. And you have to show me overlap to show me that they're staying. Okay, now this part of the graph is negative because I'm looking at the heights, by the way. I'm looking at the heights, the y values. So, for instance, this coordinate 1, negative 3 would now go to 1, comma, positive 3. Can you see a reflection of that? I'm flipping it negative to positive. So that little part of it I'm changing. Okay, number 3, same idea. Okay, so I'm going to overlap that piece. There's no arrow there, so I'm not going to put an arrow there. I'm going to overlap Okay, please note there's no arrows on it, so you don't put arrows on it. The last one had, so I also had. Okay, now these two pieces are going to have to reflect, right? Because they were negative heights, so now I got to change them to be up. So everything should always be above the y, nope, above the x-axis. So what is that up down to? A -7, right? So just a note, when you're done your graphs, you should always have your range should be above the 0 or at the 0, okay? You should never have anything graphed below. Okay, obviously this one would be exactly 0 to 7, but, and this one would have been 0 to infinite. Okay, the last question. So graph the absolute value of x minus 5. So first of all, without the absolute value, do we know how to graph this? Y equals mx plus b. Grade 10, you learned it. So what do we know? How did you start these in grade 10? What did you do? The b is the what on the graph? The y-intercept. So that's the y-intercept at -5. And the m is the what? Slope. On a graph, a slope is a what over a what maneuver? Rise over run. And how many x's do I have on this example? 1. So 1 over 1. So I'm going to go up 1, right 1, up 1, right 1. That's how I graph my line. Does that make sense from grade 10? You remember that? Okay. Now I need to graph the absolute value of that instead. So the concept is where this line is 0 or above, we're going to overlap, we're going to stay. Where the line is negative, that part of the line, now we'll have to change to positive. So I'm probably just going to take this point, 0, -5, and then put it now at 0, +5, and the shape of my final graph will now kind of be a V. So I reflected that part. Okay? So positive stays, 0 stays, but anything negative has to change to positive. Okay, on your working examples, you have one that is, I think, something like this. same idea. Do you know how to graph this? What is this? We better know how to graph it. Our exam's coming. What shape does it make? It's not a line.
Oh, it makes a parabola.
It makes a parabola shape. Where does it start?
-4.
It will start down here when you graph it. And what kind of maneuver do you do if your slope is 1 on a parabola? Do you remember your maneuvers? Over-ups? What's an over-up on a pattern of a parabola?
Oh,
1, 2, 4, 3, 9. It's a squared. So you're moving squared of your x. Do you remember that? Over, up, 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 9. Okay, so that's a hint for your work. Okay, graph it, then, well now what's the absolute of that? Okay, and then you follow the rules.